surface water. More than half of all our surface water cooperative monitoring sites, all of which are in ag areas, exceed the drinking water standard, many by more than double. The over-application of nitrogen fertilizers is the most common source of high nitrate levels in surface water bodies and groundwater. Excess fertilizer is transported through surface runoff, as well as tile drain and pump discharges. It can also be transported through ag ditches that drain to a stormwater system, creek, or river. Elevated pesticide concentrations and the resulting toxicity in surface water is also widespread in ag areas of our region. In fact, the agricultural use rates of pesticides are the highest in the state. Pesticides are transported through surface runoff, as well as tile drain and pump discharges, and can also be transported through ag ditches that drain to stormwater systems, creeks, and rivers. Elevated sedimentation and turbidity is also widespread. Ag land use practices such as bare soil, tilling, tile drain and pump discharges, and improperly graded farm roads can cause soils to erode and discharge off a farm. The removal of vegetation, stream channelization, and surface runoff can cause sediment to discharge off a farm as well. Sediment discharge from farms are highly likely to contain pollutants and discharges, even if polluted, deposit fine soil particles and sand into water bodies that can harm aquatic life. And this isn't just related to proximity to a water body either. Sediment can be transported through ag ditches or stormwater systems, and even in some cases by wind. So if a farm is not located near a creek or river, it still has the potential to contribute to the problem. Now, in the next few slides, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the new requirements under ag, what we call Ag Order 4.0. My focus today is going to be mainly on the surface water requirements because this is where non-crop vegetated management measures can be the most useful in terms of compliance. However, some of these management measures will also be useful in meeting the nitrogen application and discharge targets or limits for groundwater. We don't have time today for me to go into detail on the order requirements, but you can find information in the order. We also have recordings of recent Ag Order 4.0 grower workshops that the Irrigated Lands Program conducted in July, and these are posted on our website. I've included links to the order documents and the workshop recordings and presentations, as well as some other tools and resources I thought might be helpful to you at the end of this presentation. And most importantly, you can always reach out to the Irrigated Lands Program staff with questions. I've provided my contact information, and there's contact information for all of the rest of our team on the Irrigated Lands Program website. So the first distinction I want to make is that there's two ways to comply with the nitrogen fertilizer application limits and targets. Growers that join a third party are only subject to targets which are not enforceable. The third party will work with growers to develop work plans for irrigation and nutrient management and assist them with the planning, management practice implementation, and effectiveness assessments that are required under the order. Growers that elect to comply individually are subject to limits which are enforceable. And they'll need to develop their own work plans, do their own planning and implementation and effectiveness assessments. So under the order, fertilizer nitrogen application targets or limits are established based on crop type. These are near or greater than the application recommendations from the California fertilization guidelines for the top 6 crops typically grown in the Central Coast region. It's also important to distinguish that the targets or limits for fertilizer nitrogen application apply at the ranch level. The order also establishes numeric limits for nutrients, pesticides, and toxicity, as well as turbidity and sediment in surface receiving waters. Because these limits apply to a water body, they would generally need to be met collectively by all growers that are discharging to that water body. There are some exceptions in the order, and again, I don't have time to go into them today. There are no targets under this requirement, only limits. So because these limits generally apply collectively, growers that join a third-party program benefit because that program can assist them in work plan development, management practice implementation, and effectiveness assessment, and to collectively meet the surface receiving water limits. In terms of timelines, growers that join a third-party program have additional time to achieve the targets. Under the individual approach, the timeline is shorter. So as this slide shows, under the third-party approach, the targets take effect in 2024. Under the individual approach, the limits take effect in 2023. Most of the surface receiving water limits take effect in 2032, and that is regardless of whether the grower is participating individually or through a third party. The exception to that 2032 date is areas where TMDLs have been established in specific watersheds. For example, the Morro Bay watershed TMDL for sediment, that limit takes effect in 2053. And just as a side note, for those of you that are unfamiliar with TMDLs, they are total maximum daily loads, and they're established for water bodies impaired for a particular pollutant. So a TMDL is the maximum amount of a pollutant a water body can assimilate and still attain water quality standards. Water quality standards are designated beneficial uses of a water body. Beneficial uses are things like municipal or domestic water supply. So as an example, the water quality standard for municipal water supplies is based on levels of a pollutant present in that water that are low enough to be safe for people to drink that water. A key component of these requirements is follow-up implementation. The order requires that all growers submit a follow-up implementation work plan to the Central Coast Water Board, either individually or through a third-party program. The purpose of the work plan is to inform decisions about which management practices work best to achieve the targets or limits. In other words, the work plan helps identify follow-up actions that need to be taken to meet the targets or limits. For growers that join a third-party program, the third party will develop the work plan on behalf of their members and assist them with implementation efforts. For growers that select the individual approach, they'll need to do those things on their own. Next, I'm going to discuss some management measures that can help growers achieve the targets and limits I've just discussed.
Paula, you have about 5 minutes left.
Okay. Non-crop vegetation management measures are cost-effective ways to reduce pollutant loading and achieve the targets or limits in the order. There's numerous non-crop vegetated management measures that can be implemented. I'm going to discuss 3 today. There's other options that are more engineered, and I'm going to discuss a few of those. Cover crops are rainy season plantings. They're effective in improving water quality, reducing excess nutrients by taking up nitrogen, minimizing soil compaction, and reducing erosion. In general, cover crops require minimal maintenance. Field borders are buffer strips along the outer edge of fields with permanent vegetation. The wider the border, the more diverse the vegetation, the more effective they'll be. These offer many of the same benefits as cover crops. Filter strips are areas of vegetation that serve as buffers from cropped areas to surface water bodies, usually low-lying grasses. They perform really well in trapping sediment and nutrients. They also reduce the toxicity of pollutants and remove high rates of pathogens. And once established, they generally require minimal maintenance. Now on to engineered management practices. The 3 management measures I'll cover today are constructed wetlands, nitrifying bioreactors, and sediment basins. Constructed wetlands are designed for treatment. They're artificially created and they planted with vegetation that thrives in conditions where water is present most of the time. They're great at filtering nutrients and pesticides and also effective at trapping sediment. And just as an FYI, they've been proposed as a BMP for water quality improvements in Morro Coho, Elkhorn Slough, and the Salinas Valley watersheds. Bioreactors are essentially a trench filled with wood chips, and the wood chips attract microorganisms that convert nitrate to nitrogen. They do require ongoing maintenance, and some studies have shown that they're effective even at removing pesticides as well. But they'll also trap sediments, so that's great, but it will add to the maintenance that has to be conducted. Sediment basins are designed to collect and settle sediment-laden water. It's usually a basin with a settling pond and an inlet chamber to allow water to flow in and a high flow emergency spillway. They capture and hold irrigation and stormwater to allow sediment to settle out, and they also trap nutrients and pesticides. They do require ongoing maintenance. So now let's take a look at some cost estimates for these management measures. This table is showing you management measure cost scenarios developed by the NRCS, the National Resource Conservation Service. And you can see that the costs are a little hard to compare because the units for vegetated measures are in per acre, and the units for engineered are by unit. But the big takeaway here is really that if you consider the scale and location, in most instances, your non-crop vegetated management measures are likely to be less costly and also to mainly because they require less maintenance. So I just want to give a quick caveat that these are statewide average costs, and they may be higher in the Central Coast region because our land and lease values are higher here. So in closing, key takeaways: vegetated management measures are cost effective, they require minimal maintenance, and they're going to be highly effective in helping growers comply with the targets and limits in the order. Engineered management measures are effective too, but because of the maintenance issues, they're likely to be more costly. We do foresee the need to implement these types of management measures to comply with the Ag Orders targets and limits. And this is the page I promised with the links. And Pam is going to post this on her website, so you'll be able to access those. And thank you very much for joining us today.